Welcome to our conversation today with our teacher panel about inquiry, looking at the successes and struggles with rich tasks discussion and what these things look like within asynchronous and synchronous instruction. We want to begin with our introductions of our teacher panel today. Sam, would you mind starting us off, please?
Not at all. I am Sam Habib, and I teach 7th grade at Cameron Middle School.
Angela?
I am Angela Clay. I teach 8th grade social studies at the W.E.B. Du Bois Academy.
Kathleen?
I'm Kathleen Fight, and I teach 1st grade at Bates Elementary.
And Kiera?
I'm Kiera Gray, and I teach 9th through 12th at Valley High School, U.S. History and Developing Black Historical Consciousness.
Great. We're very thankful to our teacher panel who's joining us today to have our conversation. So to get us started, we want to start with just a snapshot of what inquiry looks like during virtual learning for your classes. So give us a little bit of a description. Angela, I believe you're going to start us off with this question.
Yes, so inquiry in my classroom right now during NTI is reflecting exactly the world that my students are living in. They are asking pretty much the questions and then developing those lessons off of there, still lining up with our curriculum and things of that nature, but it also is getting their attention and answering the questions that they want to know that's going on and how does it relate to my content? How does this relate to 8th grade content? So how does elections relate to 8th grade content? How is pandemics related to 8th grade content? How is systemic racism related to 8th grade content? And so it really mirrors my world that I'm living in currently right now, which is super dope because it's hitting everything that 8th grade does.
Absolutely. Thanks.
The inquiry in NTI, I've tried to keep it mirroring in classroom work as much as possible. When my kids come into the room, we have a warm-up question that just kind of is there to spark and engage. It's open-ended, it's free-flowing, and that helps build discussion and engage the kids in the classroom. And then we kind of jump right into the organizational task for the day. We'll focus on that for a little while and then move into sources. And the kids will move in and out of small group discussions in breakout rooms and whole group discussions, which would be the entire class. And we do that throughout all of our sources. The only difference really being that when we're in our breakout groups, it's more difficult for me to get from room to room. So I might only visit 3 out of 5 rooms as opposed to every group when we do our small groups. So I just try to kind of keep it as real life as possible, right? Or as real classroom work as possible for me.
Okay, so inquiry looks a little different for me because I'm in elementary, and so we teach everything. So we don't have a block of time that the kids come to me every day or twice a week. So I have one live session where we have inquiry and a lot of a discussion, and then I do a lot of asynchronous lessons where I try to get some good discussion out of them, unfortunately, that I cannot hear. But we follow the framework and the questions that are in the backpack.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Well, just to piggyback off Ms. Fight really quickly, it does work because she is my son's 1st grade teacher, yay. And the dialogue is definitely there from him watching the videos and how she stages the questions with him and what he wants to learn more. So just because it's a video doesn't mean that they're not still questioning things and how things are done and creating dialogue. The teacher just doesn't see it, but as a parent, I see it. So, yeah.
Great perspective to share. Thanks, Angela.
For me at the high school level, it's a little bit different because I have just varied engagement in my synchronous and asynchronous classes and instruction. And so I'm getting to do a lot more individual feedback and really kind of push forward my students' individual thinking in their asynchronous work. And then when we do get to our virtual classes and having discussion, they're able to, I feel like, have a little bit more of an enriched discussion, a little bit more advanced discussion because I've already like kind of questioned them a little bit and kind of pushed them a little bit forward.
Thanks, Kara. So one thing that I noticed that several of you mentioned was about having students to engage with each other, particularly in Sam. What resonated with me was talking about as much as you could with class structures. And I know that you like to use discussion in your classroom, like what's one of your goals. So Sam, if you could start us out with just sharing with us about what has worked well in getting students to discuss in this NTI setting for us.
Sure. There's a couple things that have really seemed to work well for my room. And the first is just, doesn't matter what time of the day, for us as teachers, is just be positive and engaging, right? Like, because the more that we are the showman and the salesman, the better off the kids are going to be at participating. And that's the number one goal, is to get all of them kind of talking amongst themselves. One of the things that's really helped is and more so actually than the regular classroom, is different avenues of discussion, right? Kids can talk out loud. They can use the chat feature of Google Meets. Sometimes I'll throw out a Google Doc and they'll all type in that at the same time. So they can use that as a way of maybe breaking down some of those barriers that they might have with virtual learning. Other things that I've done in the actual classroom, a lot of times I would just give that organizational task, and that would be what I would ask my kids to discuss. But since I'm not able to get to every small group or every kid as quickly as I would like, along with the organizational task, I'll give them a list of discussion questions that they can actually use as they go through their sources. So in that breakout room, they'll have not just the organizational task to prioritize, they'll also be able to use those kind of, I guess, finer detailed questions that they can talk about. So just giving them another set of things to talk about that I normally wouldn't. And I'm not quite sure if this falls under the same part here, but when we come back into our whole room, I'll often have a little apprehension on who is going to share. So I'll do this two different ways. There's a fantastic tool out there called Wheel of Names, where it's like a carnival wheel, right? And you can put your kids' names in there and you'll spin it virtually and it calls on them. So I'll ask a particular kid, once their name comes up, to either share their answer or something that one of their group members had said. So it kind of gives them that option. And then other times I'll instead of replacing actual kids' names, just put group names in there. So then it's not one in particular student. So just giving them options and taking the stress out of it, I think, is a big thing when we're asking kids to then discuss questions.
I have one day a week where I get them and I can actually see the discussion. They, for the most part, at first, they don't usually want to answer. And I think it's that, is it right? Is my answer going to be right or wrong? I try to be, like Sam said, very positive and encourage them to answer. Sometimes I just tell them, it's going to be more fun if you guys talk with me rather than if Miss White talks to you. And then I'll start seeing a few more hands. I also try to use, for the littles, for my sources, I try to use pictures that they can relate to, and little clips of videos that I can find that they might relate to and might engage them a little bit more.
I've used like Socratic Seminar to get them to discuss a lot, where it's a day where they don't have to worry about where's my grade coming from, right? So it's not tied to this grade. And so I'm stressing about how am I going to get this grade or whatever. It's, hey guys, watch my screen. You don't need anything else. And we're just going to sit here and discuss, and we just bounce back from each other from person to person. And I think during NTI, that's really important. I've listened to my students a lot, and one of the things I definitely hear is the workload. So giving them a day where all we're doing is just talking, and giving you like a worksheet or something that you have to turn into me by the end of the class period, it really frees them up to just want to talk, because that's all you got to do is just talk. You don't have to write anything. I do all the capturing of their thoughts on the screen so they can kind of see what each other is saying. And then that way I just noticed that stress off of them. And I think during NTI, that's really important to listen to their stress level during that. And so I know I get stressed. So they're just like smaller versions of us sometimes.
Yeah, we appreciate any opportunity to take a breath of fresh air. So thank you. So our next question, Kiara, you and I have been in some conversations. We talked about sources, and I know several of you, like, you're source connoisseurs, and you're always on the lookout for some great sources to use with your students. So explain to us a little bit about what has worked well with getting students to engage in sources, source analysis, or using sources.
For my students, at the beginning of the year, we started doing like the HIP protocol, which is an acronym for historical context, intended audience, purpose, and point of view. And we started with current sources at the beginning of the year. We did kind of like a pre-unit, like just a historical context, thinking like a historian, just really kind of getting ready for both of my classes, because the inquiry it's different, and it can be, intense, and it can be overwhelming. So we started to do, just historical thinking, and we used the HIP protocol to look at current sources. And so they were able to kind of relate to it. And then I was able to start in our more curriculum historical sources and start with our start looking at more content specific, and where we start in our actual like U.S. history. And then with developing Black historical consciousness as well, we were able to better dissect ancient historical sources when we started in our first unit. And then we're continuing to go back and like go through, okay, what's the historical context? What's the intended audience? What's the purpose, point of view of sources? My hopes, and it's kind of a little bit selfish, honestly, is that when they're writing and they have more confidence in their ability to use sources and their ability to back up their claims, that their writing is better. That is my like fingers crossed hope, because in the beginning, when we first started inquiry, it was just rushed. And that's because I rushed the process, and that rushed, their process, and it rushed the work that I was getting, and it wasn't of the quality I knew my students could do. And so now I'm hoping that if we slow down the process and we start dissecting sources, together in the beginning, and then I start to give them a little bit more freedom gradually, and start to, increase the, kind of the intensity of the sources, that they'll have the confidence and still engage in them and continue to do that.
Thanks, Kiara. That's a great reflection, especially thinking about what you started out with and how you want to restructure, and how you also have reflected and structured moving forward. So thank you very much for sharing that. Okay. Any other of our panelists? How are you guys using sources?
So in our classroom, one of the things that I've noticed is difficult during this time is not being able to really sit down with kids to view sources, especially some of my struggling readers. So we'll actually read a source a few different times. And the first time they'll read it, if it's a written source, they'll just read it for what words don't you understand? Or the next time they might read it again for what picture do you see in your head, right? So where in a normal classroom, we would be able to have these discussions, I want to say kind of on the fly, right? When we're looking at these sources virtually, I'll try to break them down and read them a few different times with different intentions, right? And then that last read would be obviously to fill out their task for the day, their organizational task.
Well, I've talked a little bit about sources already. So I use a lot of, for the littles, I use a lot of the pictures and a lot of short videos. And then it's asking them a lot of questions about what do they see. So I try to go with that before I give them any kind of information. What do you see? What do you think this means? Kind of how do you think this answers our question? So that they really are looking at that sources. But a lot of it's not reading because I'm in first grade. And so there's not a lot that they can actually, read at this time of the year. So.
Kathleen, that's a great point about thinking about adapting or adaptations of sources, especially for student needs and consideration for where you want students to go in practicing those literary skills, but also those skills of sourcing. So thank you. Okay, I want to circle back around to Sam. Something that stood out to me when you were talking about using sources with students is that you were particular about some questions that you are having students use or engage with in using those sources. So I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on that as we take a look at our next question for our panel about what has worked well in getting students to engage in questioning. So Sam, can you start us off a little bit about questioning in connection with the sources that you were talking about?
Sure. So kind of like Kathleen was saying earlier, one of the questions that I didn't use very much in the classroom that I've kind of used a lot more now is like, what do you see? Just something simple like that, right? Like using smaller, more generalizing questions that would then hopefully allow the kids to embrace the source and then discuss more with their groups, right? Because everybody can look at a picture and notice things that they see. But then bringing in other questions that we might not necessarily talk about, like, what don't you see? There might be things that are lacking in a picture, right? Like maybe a perspective's not there, or something that might have changed with some of the learning that we've already done this year. Another thing that we use when we'll talk about questioning in classes is I'll ask the kids to try and think not just about what they don't understand, but about how they can progress another student's understanding, if that makes sense. Like what question do you have? But then also what question can you ask your fellow students? So kind of making them like a talk show host almost, like where they're asking questions about the source, right, that they might already have answers to or what they think they have answers to, and then gauging how somebody else would answer that question.
Well, thanks, Sam. The whole idea that questions can only come from a teacher, totally blowing that out of the water, right? Like these questions can come from students and they can challenge each other with questions. That's completely okay. And then allowing space for that to happen. That's something we want to see not just in our classrooms, but we have some great advantage to do so in NTI, to your point, with the multiple ways in which students can engage with that.
One of the things too I've noticed with that is when I use pictures, it taps into my students who are gifted in the arts. And I love that because they bring in elements of art elements that I don't necessarily look at in a picture. I just see like the historical context of it. But because I am at an all boys school, and so they love the pictures, but I have noticed my art kids who are gifted in art, they just bring out so many wonderful elements. And it's because of the art elements. It's not necessarily the historical context, but they're able to link it because they understand art. And I think that's really important, tapping into that gifted side of those kids as well too, because it allows their thinking to be deeper and enriched. And so when I asked them, well, how did you come to this conclusion? They were able to explain to me the art elements of it. And so we used the picture of Crispus Attucks during the Boston Massacre. And they were just able to the perspective of the way the picture was drawn, they could tell that they were looking at a certain way and this person was looking at that, not necessarily because of what they saw. It was just that art element piece. And so I thought that was just really, really neat. Sometimes I don't think we tap into sometimes our gifted students enough. Well, at least I won't say everybody, I'll just speak for me. So tapping into our gifted students enough, but having them see that and then asking them to duplicate that, it gives them a chance that I don't necessarily have to write all the time, I can do this picture. And so I'm kind of meeting them where they are. And I find that to be like really, really neat for my kids who I know are struggling writers. They can showcase their performance in a picture, and it's still that same argument. So yeah, I love using pictures. That's like one of the coolest things, I think.
So Angela, just to follow up on what you're talking about with these students and the way that they see this, do you notice that they ask questions differently, or that they ask different types of questions? And if so, what does that look like?
They do. They'll ask more of the why and who in there. I love that. And well, how did we get to this point? You know, we were using this different picture with Crispus Attucks, and it's just like the normal picture that you would normally see with the one that Paul Revere did. It's more of Crispus Attucks being this aggressor in there. And it's like, well, how did he get to that point? What happened to make him get to this point? Because when they read his background off of the type of person that he was, what they read didn't match up with what they saw in the picture. So it was more or less, what is this artist trying to get us to see? And those are my gifted kids, which then opened up a totally different conversation for my kids who were just literally looking at the picture for what it was. And so ever since then, I started kind of looking up art elements to know like how to bring those questions in there so I can trigger some of their thinking, and then it creates just a whole nother discussion. So I definitely enjoy that.
Thanks. I'm particularly curious when we talk about tasks with elementary students. Kathleen, I was kind of hoping you could give us a little bit, some examples about how students are engaging with tasks for your first graders.
So I will typically record an asynchronous lesson, and then for each lesson, I'll have some kind of task, and it's usually not a very drawn out task. It can usually, I believe, be completed pretty quickly. Ms. Clay, you may be able to answer that better than I can, but it will typically have like, and I'm going to piggyback off of Angela. So she said she can learn so much by the pictures her students draws. I can also. So a lot of times that's what I'll ask because I teach first grade, that's what I'll ask them to do, is to draw a picture. Or in this case, because we're NTI, a lot of times I'll ask them, they can insert a picture. So they can search through Google and find something to insert. And then I'll ask them to write just a quick sentence. Sometimes I'll even start that for them. Like when we write our claims, I will start the question for them. I think this because, and then they'll finish it up. I also do a lot of videos because they can typically be taken pretty quickly and easily and uploaded into the classroom. And then in the beginning, I uploaded directions for the parents on how to easily upload a video so that they were able to do it. That's typically what I do. I'll have them draw a picture or insert it. There's some kind of Google slide. I've also done some slides where they'll type a sentence and then they'll insert 3 pictures or something like that that will show what they were thinking.
So I want to throw this back to our middle school teachers, to Sam and Angela. How does using tasks in your classroom compare with what that looks like in Kathleen's classroom?
Really not much different. I do a lot of the, in the normal room, right? I would do a lot of draw a picture or create a symbol to express the source or what you see. I found during NTI, right, the easy way to circumvent that is to use Google Images, right? Insert a picture, right, from Google Images that matches with your thinking. I guess our responses might be a little bit longer, our written responses anyway. And then I've also I've been using a lot more graphic organizers for them in terms of getting started with their claims or their explanations or their descriptions. So just a way for them to kind of compile their evidence as opposed to the highlighting or the underlining that we would do in person, right? We've kind of switched that over to a actual like graphic organizer through a Google Doc. So that's my difference there.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, mine is pretty much the same. I have used the elements of like Flipgrid a little bit more so they can make verbal planes in there. So that's pretty neat to kind of see. And it gives me a chance sometimes to see my kids who don't turn their cameras on sometimes. So when they do their Flipgrids in there, so I like those, as well as giving them like a choice board on what it is, like, hey, what do you guys, want to do for this one? Kind of open it up, canvas them, because like I said, it just balances them out with everything that they're doing in their other classes. So I just kind of keep that in mind. If I know they're writing an essay in English, I may not require them to do an essay for me. We may just say, hey, this is going to be a verbal claim this time around. And so you don't have to write double sometimes.
Thanks. So Kiera, with being high school, how does the tasks, what have you found that works with engaging students with tasks at a high school level?
Well, like I said, we are doing quite a bit of like writing and preparing to write. So just really taking their asynchronous assignments and giving them individual feedback and really making sure that they're, checking in with that. But also when we meet, I like to look at political cartoons quite a bit. So we dissect those and we look at that and we break those down. So then I can kind of see, their understanding and how they're processing as like the sources and such, because I'm still trying to really work out a way, because I miss, classroom discussions and us looking at sources in real time. So I'm still trying to determine a way which that can work. And so we're trying to do, the Jam boards and making sure that we're, typing in live time and discussing and such. So really just trying to just get them engaged in the class and making sure that the tasks like match up with that, and discussing it in our learning and in our virtual meetings as well.
Thank you. Well, one last question for our panelists. And Kathleen, I'd like to begin with you on this question. What changes have you made to asynchronous and synchronous instruction?
So for me, it's a lot more video time than, of course, I would have in the classroom. And I don't get as much of the discussion. I believe someone else said they really miss the discussion. I think it was Kiera. And I'm right there with her. I miss the discussion, but it is still working. I love the tasks that I'm getting back from them. And I think those are a lot better than what I even got in the classroom.
So this might be a really, really simple change, but when I first started to do this NTI, I was getting all of these blank documents back, or pieces of documents that were blank, because my kids just didn't know what to do. So one of the things I did was I highlighted and just basically filled in all of the boxes that they needed to put an answer in or needed to fill out with their work with a different color. So simple, right? That they could visually see that, oh, I need to fill this in. And another thing that I was seeing was that a lot of kids didn't have appropriate access to Google Word or Google Docs, sorry. So I then converted all of our inquiry lessons into Google Forms, which is a much easier accessible through mobile devices. So that would be a big change that I made. One
of the biggest changes I think I've definitely made through NTI is just my patience level with them compared from NTI 1.0 to 2.0. I definitely have more patience this time around than I did the first time. And it really reassuring them that I'm here for them and that I care. Sometimes it's okay for me just to put my content down, just to find out like, hey guys, what's going on with you for the day, compared to with me being in a classroom. It's like you come in, get your warm up, all right, we're moving on to this, that's whatever. But I've gotten to know a lot of them on just different levels, some of their humor, just because they see the humanity of me and I see the humanity of them. And so I think that's the biggest change that I've made during NTI.
Yeah, I agree with Angela. I've offered my students quite a bit of flexibility and, in grace and in hopes that they, return the same to me, and they have. And their assignments, even though, some of them can be late, I do feel that they are taking their time to do them. They're following the directions or emailing me and asking me questions and trying to make sure that they're getting what they need. And so just offering that flexibility, I think, has really given them a lot, and me too.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today for our teacher panel on inquiry during asynchronous and synchronous learning. As always, you can reach out to the JCPS Social Studies team by emailing us, letting us know what your questions are. If you need some help or support, we'll be glad to join you with conversation. Thank you again to all of our panelists for today. It was a great conversation, and we hope you guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon.